Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We've got another great show for you tonight. Alan Friedman is here to talk about solar imaging, which is certainly a hot topic these days. But before we get to that, let me just go over briefly the upcoming calendar. Share my screen here with that. Right, so as I mentioned tonight, we've got Alan Friedman. Then next week, we've got Dustin Brimbury will be with us, and he's going to teach us about Nina, imaging with Nina, and some useful tips and things that he's learned along the way. And then after that, Jonathan Hill will be with us, and he's going to talk about his photography of the last solar eclipse. He's got some really amazing eclipse photos to share. No show the week after that. We got the Super Bowl, so we'll all be watching that. And so no show on the Super Bowl Sunday. The week after that, Rolf Olson will be with us, and he'll be talking about a really neat project that he did with Centaurus A over basically a 10-year period. So that'll be really interesting as well. And then we do have a couple of shows scheduled in March, but you will notice here that we do have a few open dates in February, the end of February, and the first couple of weeks in March. So this is the time for that standard pitch that we always throw out, which is that if you've got an idea, something that you'd like to talk about, we'd certainly love to have you on the program, so you can send us an email, fill out the contact form, and we'll talk to you about it and try to get you on the show. So let me stop sharing. So, and next week's guest, Dustin Brimbury, is with us tonight. And Dustin, could you give us just a brief taste of what you'll be talking about next week in your presentation?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Dustin Brimbury. Next week, I'm going to kind of be talking about Nina a little bit and my journey, because I did astronomy for years growing up as a kid, and for years, and then got kids and had to get away from all of that, and just got back into it last year, and for the first time started doing astro imaging and bought a setup and went through all of that and experimented and learned lots of lessons, and got fairly good at using Nina, and hopefully I can give you some tips. For some of you experts out there, I'm sure you can still teach me some things, but I'll do my best, and I'll try to make it fun and entertaining for you as well. So thanks, everyone.
Cool, that sounds great. And yeah, Nina certainly seems to just be taking over the astrophotography world these days. I know a number of us use it, and but one of the things about it is, of course, it's so powerful, and you've got all the different plugins and whatnot, and it seems like different folks have sort of different ways to get to the same thing. So it's always neat to see other people's perspectives on how they use Nina. So I know we'll all be looking forward to that. So then that brings us to tonight's presentation by Alan Friedman. And Alan is one of the premier solar imagers in the astrophotography community. He's been photographing the sun for years, and actually has pioneered some imaging techniques and processing techniques, and which have resulted in some really stunning images. I'd encourage everyone to take a look at Alan's website, because he's got some really kind of mind-blowing images of the sun, and some planetary and the moon too, but really the sun is the star of the show there, so to speak. So and we were thrilled when Alan agreed to appear on the program and teach us all some new things about imaging the sun. So Alan, if you're ready, I'll hand it off to you and you can take over.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Yeah. Great. So for those of you who might have heard me talk before, I've done quite a few presentations for the old AIC and down at NEAF and a number of different places online. Bear with me a little bit, because I've tried to update this, and I hope it will remain interesting to you. And for those who haven't, I'll take you on a little journey through my adult life with astrophotography and astronomy. This is going to be a show mainly about my backyard, which is in downtown Buffalo, New York. This is an idealized image from my backyard. Some things have been removed, and this is the more actual picture from my backyard. It's an urban backyard where we have power lines and cable TV lines and telephone lines for those that still have landlines. And this is a transit of a power transformer in the sun, in front of the sun. My backyard is not ideal in any respect, but it is 50 feet from my back door, which makes it a wonderful place for me to hang out and do imaging because I can get there easily. I can't see the sun pretty much from in November, December, and January. But this is an image I took in January, and I was playing around with a double exposure as the sun passed in front of one of those power lines, obviously doing two exposures, one focused on the power line, one focused on the sun. But it's the kind of stuff that I have to deal with on a regular basis. This is another thing that is a constant companion, the cloud cover. Whoever thought to build a city on the east side of a great lake is really not the best place. And we have clouds pretty much from the second week in October into February, where it makes it very difficult to do anything. This close conjunction of the moon and Mars was beautiful, and I had a moment to see it and snap a picture of it. And this was the very beginning of the great solar eclipse of April 8th, 2024. From my backyard, Buffalo was on the center line. Actually, the center line ran about a mile south of my house. So the question was, do you stay or do you go? And I'll explain what went into that decision in a little bit. But again, clouds. And we get a little bit of this for many months of the year. This is my backyard observatory, which has an old monolith mount holding up my astrophysics equipment. And sometimes it is completely unusable. This was just a couple of years ago. And when we have a storm like this, it's best to just stay in the house. I don't attempt to do much else. This is the Nordic Optical Telescope in the Canary Islands, not my backyard, but a wonderful observatory that is famous for this image, which in 1990 was the highest resolution of image of Saturn taken from Earth. And not too many years later, it's at 15 years later, this is what was possible to do from my backyard with a 10-inch telescope. So 1/10 the diameter and much lower resolution than that. But the techniques of lucky imaging has allowed amateurs to do somewhat startling work imaging the planets. And this is a 20-year-old picture. The work that's being done these days by these talented people who continue to point scopes to the planets is just startling. This was a journey that I had during those years, 6 images of Saturn. The 7th one was actually constructed from an earlier image. When the rings went edge on that year, it was too close to the sun to be able to photograph it. But this is 2003 to 2009. I dabbled quite a bit with lunar imaging for a while. I did love that, but for that, seeing is so critical, and the images take a long time to put together. And Buffalo is not known for its seeing conditions. We're under the jet stream much of the time. So I found that I had 1 or 2 evenings, nights a year or early mornings a year when the air was still enough to really do justice to high resolution imaging of the moon. Well, I put this in here, this Cassini image, because one of the topics of my talk is why do we do this stuff? I mean, especially folks who are interested in imaging solar system targets. There are high resolution cameras on spaceships taking pictures of the planets. There are observatories imaging the sun in multiple wavelengths outside the Earth's atmosphere, taking pictures 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. And sometimes, if you do this for a long time, you have to ask yourself, and I'm sure you do, what's the point? Like, why am I doing this? Is it, and sometimes it's not even fun. You know, visual imaging, I always say that when I did visual astronomy, I never went to bed in the middle of the night having not learned a little something that I didn't know when I went out there. Whereas with imaging, I think there are a lot of times that you go out and you go to bed exhausted and think, I just wasted the evening. So it's something that crosses our mind. One of the things is it's just magical. I mean, we are able to see things like this solar eclipse, which is just brings you closer to whatever it is that you believe in, whether it's God, religion, science, physics. It's a remarkable experience that we have to do. It also is fascinating because it lets us understand the beautiful complexity of our bodies. This image of the moon, the crescent moon showing Earth shine and sunshine, was the first public image first published image that I had in the 1990s. Sky and Telescope picked it up, and I loved it because you can only do this with a double exposure. I've gone out and photographed this other times since. Your eyes, though, are able to see both the sunlit part of the crescent moon and the moonlit, the earthlit part of it easily. It's your adaptive vision is able to see both properly exposed in the same view, but it's much more complex to try and do this with a camera, and you basically can't do it without some form of double exposure, because the dynamic range of the sunlit moon is so compelling. And of course, the sun has been my object of desire for the last 20 years. And sometimes you just happen into an amazing feature that lets you appreciate in 2 dimensions the 3-dimensionality of space and of our sun. This prominence was a particularly amazing example of that. And sometimes from my backyard, I get lucky, and the Northern Lights reaches down to our latitude, and this was last May. And it was very brief, but I tried to go out to a darker site and it was over. So sometimes we get lucky. These are my main instruments. Like most of us, I have a little bit of a telescope problem. These are my 4 astrophysics telescopes. The tiny one in front is an F5 stowaway. Followed, the black one is the AP Traveler. And the long one is a 6-inch astrophysics refractor. And that's the 10-inch Astrophysics Mac Cassegrain to the right. Very just wonderful, amazing instruments I've been very lucky to have been able to acquire when they were a little more easily available. This is the F5 stowaway. It's just this remarkable instrument. And this is what most of the solar images in my presentation are taken with. A 14-inch long 92 millimeter refractor with a 90 millimeter Coronado filter in the front of it. And there's a blocking filter in the back and a little tiny streaming camera. So it's a very small setup. Here is the stowaway, which I nicknamed Little Big Man, sitting on top of its big brother. But most of the times it just rests on the top of the tube rings, which hold a 6-inch telescope. And this is a very important piece of my astronomy gear. It is my solar observing cloth, which is made by my wife, who is a costume designer. It's half polar fleece and half silver lame. And I always like to joke that everybody looks better with a little silver lame. It also works really well to push the heat of the sun away from the black cloth underneath. So the beautiful thing for me, about what I do, my gear as I've set it up, is it is mobile. And when something's happening close to home and I can't see it from my backyard, it's a very easy matter to put it in the car and take a quick trip. This is just south of my home in Buffalo, looking across Lake Erie. You can see there's very little cabling in this. I've got my old Astrophysics 400 mount connected to a battery, so it's tracking. And the laptop, which is running off its battery, is just powering the camera, and through the same cable that's allowing the images to stream to the laptop. And this is the setup that I take with me. It's a Halliburton case, and it's got just everything that I need for a journey for solar astronomy and even some nighttime astronomy too. It's got a diagonal, the Coronado filter at the lower left with an adapter ring, the blocking filter next to that. I've got 3 cameras in there, a bunch of tele extenders, an eyepiece, which I use always in the beginning of my journey. And this gives you a sense of how big it is. I mean, it's a really little setup. And this is what I was shooting that evening. It was October of 2014, so 11 years ago. And it was a wonderful conjunction of a partial solar eclipse with the biggest sunspot that had appeared on the sun since, I believe, 1948. And there it is that same week. It was a really remarkable evening, and we got to watch the eclipse progress as it set into Lake Erie. Another journey, this I believe was the first. I can't remember if this is the first or the second transit of Venus, one in 2004 and one in 2012. The second one, I got to go up to Mount Wilson. I think this might have been that one. And there's a little peek into the atmosphere of Venus in this image. This was taken at the Winter Star Party. I gave a presentation there a bunch of years ago, and somebody let me know that there was going to be a transit of the space station in front of the sun. And I gave the presentation, and a bunch of guys helped me pack up, and we went in the car and drove about 20 miles to Marathon Key. We had figured out just about where to be, and I almost missed it because those things are such a narrow event horizon, 500 yards away, and you can miss it completely. That was the first effort I had. I've done it a number of times since. This was during the depths of the last solar minimum. And this a couple of years later, as the sun was returning to life. And I love the two of these. They're very similar. I processed them similarly. There was nice detail, but it'll also allowed me to show the same event with the sun in 2 different stages of its solar cycle. And sometimes it just, you just attach a camera, not a streaming camera, but just a simple camera to the telescope. And I don't normally get up this early, but I didn't want to miss this sunrise partial eclipse. And this was taken from the rooftop of my building where my company is. Some of you may know I'm a greeting card publisher. I'm not a scientist. My business is based in an old Model T factory. And from the roof, I get a nice view sometimes of celestial events. This was one of those times. And you'll have, I think, a wonderful talk about solar eclipse photography soon, but this was just comparing using a 400 millimeter lens with a 100 millimeter lens. I had two setups going, 2 cameras going at the same time. So this picture was taken in 2017 in Western Kentucky, where I went to observe my first solar eclipse. And I really did not intend to take pictures, but of course I was tempted to set something up in my scope. So I did have a streaming camera set up and took some pictures in monochrome. It was not an ideal setup at all, but I loved this one. It was taken just a second or two after totality, and it was the last image I was able to get before the entire chip bloomed, and it was just too bright and I had to cover it. it was really just a marvelous experience. There were clouds that day. We were talking about it earlier. And the clouds were high, but fairly dense cumulus clouds. And it looked like we weren't going to see it. And then about halfway through the partial phase, the weather changed dramatically. The temperature got cooler. It was 97 degrees in Western Kentucky that day. And the temperature dropped about 15 degrees. And the clouds evaporated. And the sky became perfectly clear. And it was the most emotional part of the eclipse for me because I realized I was really going to get to see it after traveling all that way. So April 8th, I stayed in Buffalo, and this was the very end of the partial phase. So you might say I was skunked, but the jury's out on that from my perspective because I had a wonderful time. And I like the images that I captured. If this is like the Cheshire smile of the sun, if you look to the right, along the edge of the sun, you can see that little beautiful triangular prominence, like a ghost tooth in the Cheshire cat. This is the reason that I stayed home. I was like many people, pins and needles. Am I going to stay? Am I going to go? Am I going to, where am I? Have family in Vermont. And I was, just torn up about it. The eclipse passed directly overhead, but yet I was considering leaving. And then the day before, my family from Vermont with my 2 grandchildren and my daughter from Washington, D.C. walked into my backyard to surprise me. It was 4 weeks before my 70th birthday, and they just wanted to be with me for this experience. And I get weepy when I think about it because it settled the matter instantaneously. I wasn't going anywhere. And I just got totally relaxed about it and decided I would see what I would see. And this is kind of what I saw. I took about a dozen pictures. No 2 were the same. So when the sky gives you clouds, you make cloud lemonade, however you want to say it. You work with what you've got. And I did love these pictures. And you can always rest assured with an event like the eclipse that there will be 10,000 fabulous pictures of the eclipse all over social media the next day. So it's not terrible if yours wind up being a little bit different. So white light is the place to start imaging the sun. You know that you can make a white light filter yourself. You can buy them inexpensively. This is a little collection of the ones that I have, including a full aperture for the 10-inch Mac. And this is what it looks like to look at a sunspot group through astrophysics 10-inch Mac Cassegrain in reasonably good seeing. I never really get great seeing during the day, but when I can see granulation in the video, I know that I have decent seeing and it's worth taking a picture. And by image processing, I'm able to freeze the moments of good seeing and colorize it and turn it into a picture. And this is just some other examples of images, of high resolution images taken through the 10-inch Mac with a white light filter. This image was the benefit of having friends in places with good seeing. This image was captured by Randy Shivak when he was living in Arizona. He's one of the moderators of the Solar Activity Group on Facebook, great guy. And he shared this image with me and allowed me to process it. And we were able to have it be an astronomy picture of the day together, co-authored. But I'd say I have maybe 1 or 2 times a year when the seeing is good enough to use my AP MacCast either at its native focal length or even better with a 2 times Barlow in there. But most times I have to step away a little bit because the seeing just doesn't support that magnification. But it's still possible to create beautiful images looking at the full disk of the sun. And think of a way to tell this story so that it's compelling. And I'll talk more about some of the aesthetic decisions I make to do this. And I hope you'll be able to kind of step away from the technology a little bit and appreciate the image processing techniques for their picture making capabilities, because I really use different things than most of you will. I use mostly old equipment, and I use only Macintosh computers. So I'm using software which actually can't even be purchased anymore, and doing most of my image processing in Adobe Photoshop. And we'll go through some of the processing techniques shortly. This is a white light view of that giant sunspot in 2014. And some more recent full disk images with non-colorized, but with an atmospheric element added to make it look as if the sun is being photographed in daytime, which of course it is, but we don't have any sky because our solar filters only allow about 1/1000th of 1% of the sun's energy to come through. So then there's hydrogen alpha, and hydrogen alpha is the exciting filter to look through to be able to see the whirls and swirls of the chromosphere. And if you get a good day and you have a good hydrogen alpha filter, you can see remarkable detail in the chromosphere of the sun, which is the atmospheric level above the photosphere. I love this little journey across this, it isn't the surface of the sun, but across the chromosphere, and shows many features. This was taken last year. I had a friend loan me a telescope that allowed me to use a double stack for a brief period of time. I normally only use a single filter, but of course the contrast is enhanced greatly with a double stack filter. So this is just a little story about how I started processing images the way that I do. It happened during solar minimum in 2009, and I was just at my wit's end trying to sustain my interest in taking pictures of the sun. I had just kind of stopped doing planetary imaging, and the sun looked like this pretty much every day for a couple of years. And one day while I was working on this bland, featureless portrait of the sun, there is a tiny little active region there, but it's not even a sunspot. I was in Photoshop and I hit the invert command just to see what it would do. And it created this texture in the chromosphere that was totally new to me. I'd never experienced anything like it before. And I was thinking, you know, if you ever have the pleasure of going for a cardiac scan, a CT scan, you'll see that in looking at the images are always processed with multiple changes in contrast, changes in tonality, inversion, anything to be able to understand the information clearly and compellingly. And so I started working in this technique. This was an image that had a lot of play on the internet in 2010. Its name is It's Not the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, and it was taken around Halloween of 2010. And it was quite startling at that time because no one was using this technique to process images in this way. This was a traditionally processed image utilizing a positive image of the chromosphere and colorized prominences, brightened up a little bit. But this is the same image inverted, and it provides a different look at the depth in the active regions, and especially the filaments. Allows you to see the filaments as detached from the surface in a different character. So here's just a little journey through maybe 10 years of taking full disk portraits of the sun. Some of these are my favorites. They were all, of course, shot with a monochrome camera, so the color is all applied. None of this color is real color. It's added for effect, for aesthetics, and to make the story compelling so that it gets the attention of the lay public who normally don't look at these kind of images. and sometimes I stay away from color. As a greeting card publisher, I deal with color in my day job all the time, and I have to say it kind of terrifies me. I don't, I much prefer working in black and white when I can. This was during the last solar minimum. The sun was featureless for several years, but there were always prominences, which was great. But again, it came back to looking like this, which was very much like what it looked like in 2009. I had the benefit from a friend of mine who collects wonderful high-end solar imaging gear. He loaned me a 90 millimeter dedicated calcium K-line telescope, which lived the summers at my house for 6 or 7 years. And this is also an image of the chromosphere, but a lower level, the way the sun looks through calcium K-line filter in the near ultraviolet. And slowly the sun started to get some life back in it again. The sunspots came back, filaments came back, and it became quite active. As it is now and has remained, we're probably getting close to the middle of solar max now. We'll spend some time looking at how this image was processed shortly. And this was an image from last year with the double stack setup. And in the last one, a monochrome image. So the other place to spend time in solar observing is with the prominences. They are marvelous, always available, ever changing, and they're just so fanciful because our brains work to see things in them. Pareidolia is the name of that phenomenon, and if you play with it, you'll always find something that a prominence appears to be, and it helps you in the naming of your pictures, which is actually quite important if you'd like to publish them. And being able to add a little fancy is helpful. This one, when I give a talk and have audience feedback, it's a very old image, but I always I just love what it looks like, and I always ask the audience what it looks like, and folks will throw things out, and I just say, wrong, it's not that, it's this, which is Bigfoot in negative. It's very quick imaging to be able to do these prominences. They can be processed quite quickly, and then add an occulting disk in front of the overexposed white disk of the sun, and it creates a picture that can be shared quite promptly on space weather or even astronomy picture of the day, or whatever news groups or communities that you are on that you enjoy sharing pictures of. Because, news needs to be newsworthy. So I often, when I have a interesting prominence, I will publish one of these images quite quickly just to get it out there. But usually, if I have something this dramatic and the seeing is good, I will add the chromospheric detail back into this image. It's taken at a different exposure. The exposure is much shorter to get the chromosphere. The prominences require a longer exposure, and it is possible to use a camera with a greater bit depth, 16-bit depth, and capture both at the same time, and then tease the dynamic range out of the images. But I generally do 2 exposures at an 8-bit depth. It's faster, takes up less computer room, and it's just the technique I've gotten into. And just a couple, this was that prominence the next day, and a couple of different processing of it to show it in a different light. And just a couple of favorite images of prominences with the chromosphere included. This is just a view from, from my laptop underneath my silver lame solar cloth, just enjoying while I'm capturing, enjoying looking at the screen and using my phone to show the variances in seeing from frame to frame. And this was the image that resulted from that capture. these are some of my my favorite types of images to do. And it's not at a great my base exposure for a full disk portrait of the sun is using the Stowaway at its native focal length with a 2 times Barlow, which makes it a 900 millimeter focal length. And I'll show you the camera can capture the full disk of the sun at that focal length. It's a 6 megapixel streaming camera. For these images, I use a Botter FFC that Astrophysics sells, which increases the effective focal length a little more than 3 times, about 1700 millimeter focal length. So the seeing has to be a little better, but it doesn't have to be super fantastic. And these are all captured at that longer effective focal length with the same setup. This was one of the last images before the clouds rolled in October. So this shows you a stream at 1700 millimeter focal length on a relatively good day. And the technique of lucky imaging, which is no different the way I do it than the way anyone else would do it using Registax or Astro Stackered. I'm using an old piece of software written for the Mac called Astro IIDC, which was discontinued quite some years ago, and I keep a couple of laptops available that can still run it. It won't run on modern Mac computers, but it does a really nice job. And I worked with Milton, who developed this software, to try and incorporate some of the features that I felt I needed in my image processing. So it's almost like a custom piece of software. And once I have no longer any hardware to run on it, I'll probably have to get a PC and learn how to use the software that everyone else does.
Alan,
yeah.
I think there are a couple of questions
Sure.
that you're probably going to get into. Let me read them off for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to describe your workflow.
I
You're
am.
starting to describe your tools. Okay.
In just a minute.
And Tariq asks, what made Alan fall in love with the sun over other astro targets?
Well, you know, it's a bunch of things. I don't really have a place to go to do dark sky imaging. I mean, Cedar, what the heck is it? Cherry Springs State Park. A lot of my friends drive over there to do imaging. But as I got older, I just became fussier about time and about my ability to be cold. And the sun is available from my backyard 9 months a year, and it's got a different story to tell most days. So it's a great target, and like a lot of us, I just gravitated to something that I became familiar with and stayed with it. And I still haven't pushed the limit to, you know, feeling like I've accomplished nearly 50% of what I could possibly do. So there's still more adventure in it for me.
Okay, those are the two questions that are out there. So
sure. Thanks for your patience with getting to the image processing. I'm just about there. But this is the first step of it. So if you look at this, you can see that there's our eyes, again, those beautiful adaptive eye-brain combination we have is able to see quite a bit of sharpness in this detail. But if I stopped this video and went through it frame by frame, some of the frames would be sharp and some of them would be quite blurry. So the first step is to use software to analyze this stream and to pick out the best frames. And the software I have will do that. It will put them into a file and basically present them to me. The number that I select, I usually work with about 300 frames from a stream of 1800, which is kind of the limit of my setup for tracking accuracy. It's not perfect. And so I work with those 300 frames, and the thing that I put in, asked Milton to put in, was the ability to look at them. Because programmers don't like you to see how the program works. They want you to believe that it's perfect, and it often is perfect, but I still like to be able to look at them. So the next image is the stream of the best frames, and now they're ordered by frame quality. So when I run this, you'll see it jerks around crazily because the best frames are not necessarily in sequence, and my polar alignment is not perfect. So you're seeing one of the complications of the data that I have, which is the image, the features have to be aligned, the frames have to be aligned. So in the next step, I'm still using Astro IIDC to align the data so that the features are aligned using this technique I'll show you in a minute. But once they're aligned, it allows me to process it and increase the contrast and increase the sharpness subtly, but enough to definitely improve the quality of the information that I present. And this is a typical capture of the prominences. You can see the surface detail there, but it has to be overexposed to reach the full amount of information available in the prominences. So the resulting image is a combination of the prominence image and the chromospheric image put together. And then it's colorized. So let's go through this image, which was chosen as the solar astronomy photograph of the year at the Royal Observatory several years back. 2019, I think, was one of the last trips I took before the pandemic. This shows the little squares on the left that are used to align these images. Each of these squares is a separate alignment point, and that happens because of the movement of the data, because of my polar alignment, but also because of the blurring of the atmosphere. And the images are not exactly the same shape from frame to frame, even if the polar alignment was perfect. So if I only aligned it at one point, say number 8 in the middle of the frame, it would be nice and sharp there, but the rest of it would be smooth, which is something you get from stacking, but it would not be clear. It would not have the clarity. So doing multiple alignment points is very important. There are, how many here? Looks like 13, I think 13 alignment points used just for the prominences here. And you can see how sharp they got. For the disk, I would use as many as 170 alignment points and wait while the software align them and then creates a mosaic of the optimized areas into one picture. And all of this is done in Astro IIDC before I go to Photoshop. A common thing that solar folks like to do is to put a reference of the Earth size in the image. And a quick easy way to do that is if you're in Photoshop and you're working on the image, you increase the canvas size big enough so that you can scribe a circle of the outside diameter or circumference of the sun. And using the handy fact that the Earth, that the sun has 109 Earth diameters across it, we can take the size of this circle, which is 2,860 pixels across, and divide that by 109, and then create a marquee in the sky background, and either color it blue, or you can actually take a NASA image of the Earth and size it correctly, and give a sense of the scale of these prominences to the Earth. And the final stage in this is to add the chromospheric detail in and to colorize it. And we'll look at that technique in more detail in just a minute. This is another scale marker here with a NASA image of the Earth and a moon image put to scale, so you can get a sense of the size of this prominence from the Earth to moon distance. And the final processed image. These things are so big, it always blows everyone's mind when you can put it in some terms that are understandable. So let's look at how this image is created. So we have our prominence image, which the surface is completely burned out in this case. And the way to look at these layers in my Photoshop document is on the right. Look at the layer in each of the slides that has the eye next to it. That is the active image that's being shown. So this is the base image I'm working with, which is the stacked image of the prominence, which was done in Astro IIDC, aligned multiple times and very mildly sharpened in Astro IIDC, mainly because the sharpening tools there are somewhat coarse. And this is the case with Registax also. I'm not too sure about Astro Stackert, but to my knowledge, Photoshop is one of the few programs that allows you to use unsharp mask in a diameter less than 1 pixel. So you can do a 0.4 pixel unsharp mask, which allows you to apply sharpening to very small elements in the picture and try and keep your sharpening natural looking and not overdone, which is something that I value highly. This is the sharpened version, just to take you back and forth. So we're now 3 levels up. It's also been brightened slightly. You can see I've used the curves or the levels to bring the brightness levels up, not oversaturating any in white, but allowing them to be brighter than they were in the original file. So next, there is a little bit of a gradation added. I do this often, and the blending technique that I use for this is called screen. I wish I could explain to you exactly what it does. We had a great guy who used to come to the imaging seminars, Alan Erickson, who was one of the founding developers of Photoshop. And I never really was able to understand from him exactly what this level blending technique does, but it's very useful for applying gradation. You'll see it more in the next image. And this blending layer has been colorized slightly. Oops, did I go the right way? No, sorry. So there's the gradation. And here we have the very basic processed chromospheric image, which has not been inverted. Here it is inverted. And here it is with the levels adjusted a little bit to add contrast, but subtly. And then a color is applied to the chromospheric detail and the finished image with subtle tweaks. So it's not really a crazy amount of steps. The full disk images are a little more complicated. This was one taken, I believe, 2 years ago. So we start off with the background layer, which is optimized for the prominences. The next step is to add the chromospheric detail of the disk. And you'll notice when I add the full disk in, they're not the same size. And the reason for that is in the different exposure. Remember, the prominences have been exposed quite a bit longer with a slower shutter, so that permits or causes the edge of the sun to be larger, even though they're captured at exactly the same size. So in order to make them more realistic, I usually opt to make the background image smaller. And the next slide shows that. So I've just reduced the size of the background image so that the distance between the two images is brought together. I added some color in a color layer to the prominence image. And here is that gradation level. And this one is a little bit more complicated. We're using the gradation level, which is the tool underneath the eraser on the toolbar to the left. And it is both gradated and colorized. And it's using the screen blending mode. And the screen blending mode allows the underneath levels to show through. That's key. And it's just affecting the gradation of the background. And it gives this atmospheric technique, which, you know, when I first started doing this, my techniques were controversial. It was funny, I'm an exhibiting artist, and my solar images were a little too sciencey for the art community and a little too arty for the science community. But I've always felt that you're taking these pictures of the sun during the daytime, not at night. And the fact that you don't have enough light to illuminate the background doesn't mean that we can't add some atmosphere into the picture. So that's the reason that I've done these, and for the fact that it makes a compelling image. So in the next, we add color to the, in a color layer to the disk. This has actually had some tonality changes, which is why it's normal layer and not a color only layer. And the color was just a little bit subdued, so I added, I took the entire disk and added a little bit, 9% opacity of a very intense cerise, just to brighten that up slightly. And that was the completed image. So this example just shows you some of the power of the inverted tonality, which again, as I started using this, it was quite controversial. The first year I was involved in the Astronomy Photography of the Year, I had a sunspot image accepted and it won an award, but there were no inverted images selected by the judges. And the year that I won the Solar Image of the Year, every solar image that was in the exhibition was an inverted image. It's become appreciated for what it shows and the clarity that maintains. This is data that was from the Big Bear Solar Observatory in California, which I had the opportunity to process through the Solar Activity Group in Facebook, which is a wonderful community. If you're on Facebook and you enjoy solar stuff, I'd highly recommend hanging out there. And this is the processing that I did, which is basically just an inversion and a colorization, very little other change. But in this version, you can really look into the depth of this, what is a tiny sunspot captured in incredibly high resolution. And I always loved the way it turned out. And it was a fun project to have this become an astronomy picture of the day in 2015. It took a lot of folks to say okay to having that happen. And interestingly, the last time before this, that Big Bear Solar Observatory, which is famous as being one of the highest resolution solar observatories in the world, the last time they had an APOD was this image in 1997. So kind of interesting development in solar imaging in that time. So you might know that my background is in art. I'm an exhibiting artist, and I've been fortunate to have this work shown in various places. I'm also a printmaker, so the making of prints is something that interests me a lot, and getting the print values to try and capture the feeling of the images with as much power as you can on the screen with a light behind them. This was a show from this past year, which was a wonderful opportunity at the Birchfield Penny Art Center in Buffalo. They are the holders of the life's work of the American watercolorist Charles Birchfield, who was a fabulous artist. And they mounted a show in honor of the Buffalo being in the path of the total solar eclipse. And they curated a show of Birchfield's work. He was very interested in science and weather and nature and my work. And it was a really beautiful opportunity to be shown in that gallery. This is a show that's up currently at the View Art Center in Old Forge, New York. I hope to get there to see it. It's a little bit of a difficult place to get there in the winter, but this will be on view till February 15th. I do collaborations. I've had musicians who've approached me to be able to use some images that spoke to them, because the sun is such an evocative subject. This was done by a small New York City band based in Astoria, which is where my parents grew up and close to where I grew up in New York City. The band didn't have money to really pay for this, so we arranged to have that I would get 2 tickets to their first appearance on Saturday Night Live, which has not happened yet, but hopefully someday it will happen for them and for me. This was an interesting project with an Estonian musician who goes by the name Randaja. I thought he did a beautiful job working with one of my images to create this album cover. And this is a favorite. This is a book that was produced by Nanamica, which is the Japanese version or ownership of the North Face company. And they did this series of books called The Roots of Life, which were given to school children in Japan. Each one was based on a different color. And the final book in the series was Roots of Life Yellow. And the publisher of the book came to Buffalo, and we worked on this image together. It had a lot of my work in it. And it produced a show that took place at the Nanamica headquarters in Tokyo. And unfortunately, I was not able to go to the opening. It was on Thanksgiving. But I did wind up getting one of the signature jackets that was produced in connection with this exhibition and the publication of the book. And I have an extra large Nanamica Roots of Life jacket, which does not fit myself or my children or anybody that I know. It's just a thing about sizing in Japan. But this is what I love to do the most, which is to go places with Little Big Man and my solar observing cloth and to share views of the sun from an observing field. And it's just, there's nothing more fun than to see that wow moment. This is the great planetary astrophotographer Thierry Legault looking through my scope at NEAF a number of years back. And you just never know who's going to look through your scope, you know, and who the little kid on the back is, and if it'll influence him at all, or maybe influence his mom to influence him. It's some of those unknown, untold things that just make this hobby so wonderful. I always loved this image of Woody Guthrie's sticker on his instrument, because I think similarly about our instruments and the power of them and what we can do with them when we take them out into the field. And it's fun to make pictures, but it sure is fun just to share a live view. It can alter somebody's life. When you have nothing to do, maybe spend a little time and visit my website, Averted Imagination, and feel free to reach out to me there. There's ways to reach out to me there. I love to talk about what I do and what you do. Thanks very much.
Alan, there are a couple of questions. Let's see. Somebody asked whether you use a particular kind of software. Let me see. I think I've lost the question. Well, do you ever alter the color of an image based on the histogram rather than putting on a color layer?
Based on the histogram, well, the histogram really determines tonality rather than color. At least it does for me, because I'm using a monochrome camera, so there's no color histogram. But no, I mean, the color is all, I don't want to say it's arbitrary, it's carefully selected, but it is applied. And you know, to tell you the truth, when I do photography, I mostly do black and white photography. But if you're trying to circulate photographs, circulating black and white images is next to impossible. It's just, the world wants color. So that is the reason that so many solar images are colorized. They are, of course, all taken with monochrome cameras if you're working with the chromosphere, because the chromosphere exists only at 656.3 nanometers in the deep red. So there's no reason to use a color camera. Monochrome camera has much more resolution. So if you're using color, it's applied. But that said, I am very drawn to black and white images, and for my personal work, I'm very happy to present the work in black and white.
We've had that discussion with our images, both for deep sky and for solar. And my argument always is, you have more sensors for black and white for grayscale than you do color by a factor of 10. So you should perceive more detail in a black and white image than in a color image. I'm not sure it's an accurate argument, but that's
Well,
the
it's
argument
true
I
because
usually make.
it takes 4 pixels to present color in a typical Bayer matrix. So you definitely have more resolution in front of you. I mean, there's a lot of things that affect resolution. The atmosphere being the most profound filter that any of us have to or stuck, imaging through. So there are a lot of things that control our resolution. But all things being perfect, a black and white camera will deliver more resolution than a color sensor.
Alan, the question that Eric was looking for earlier was from Robert. He's asked, have you ever used Lynkeos, Lynkeos, on Mac for video frame stacking?
I haven't. I have to say that I'm really not a tech guy, although I'm able to to do tech with some proficiency. But once I learned how to work in my Mac software using Astro IIDC, I've really been loath to change it because I understand its limits and its capabilities. It's a finite pathway. I mean, I'm not going to be able to use it forever. But to this point in time, it really is the only thing that I've used in the last, since 2004, 2005. And I've gotten better cameras, but the cameras I'm using are from my last camera purchase was 2012. I actually didn't purchase it. I was given a 6 megapixel streaming camera when it first came out by Point Grey Research, which is now the company FLIR. And they wanted me to test it, and I tested it, and it was fantastic. And I said, what do I have to pay for this if I want to keep it? And it was $3,500 at the time, which was a pretty expensive webcam. And the owner of the company said I could just keep it. And I've been using it ever since. I have three Point Grey cameras, one for planetary, one for the higher resolution solar images. The zoom ins are done with a 2K, 2 megapixel camera, and the full discs are done with the 6 megapixel.
Do you ever go out at night and grab a little faint fuzzy or a gassy nebula or anything?
I don't. I mean, I really have. There's so many fantastic people doing that stuff, and there are so many cables. I would at this point in my life, I would trip over all those cables that are out there. I mean, I've got a 1200 mount in my backyard, and I'm certainly, have the equipment capable to take. I have a 900 mount that I've kept for going to star parties and doing that stuff. But at this point, I love my friends who do it, but I think I'm at my happy place where it comes to imaging.
Does your 1200 live outside in the winter, or do you
It
bring
does.
it
It
in?
lives outside all the time. The scopes live inside. They're kind of irreplaceable. These, I don't know, the F5 stowaway. I don't know if you ever see one come up for sale on Astromart, but one sold for $15,000 a couple of years ago, more than I paid for the 10-inch Mac. So, and the 10-inch Mac is also irreplaceable. So, I take pretty good care of those things and take them in and out.
I think they sold the last 10-inch Mac in an auction on Astromart and sold for $58,000.
Yeah, that was a one of a kind.
Yeah.
Is it a 10-inch or 12-inch? I think it was a 12.
Maybe it was a 12-inch Mac. Yeah.
Yeah, Roland is a marvel, and the whole astrophysics company is. I've been there a couple of times and know them well, and I can't speak more highly of a company or just a group of professionals. It's amazing to see the handwork that goes into figuring these lenses. And
I have a 130 GT in my basement.
great thing.
I don't have any use for it right now, but I will not give it up. I told my wife she can bury it with me.
Well, these tools are, they're works of art and works of love, and in some ways they inspire what we do. That little F5 stowaway is so small with the 90 millimeter filter on the front of it. It is the smallest 90mm solar telescope that's possible. You can't have one that's smaller, and to have it in a little case that I can throw in an overhead compartment of a plane and schlep it up to Mount Wilson, you know, it's a gift. I apologize for the Mac-centric and idiosyncratic way that I do things. I hope that the aesthetic decision-making is worthwhile for the audience, because really that's a lot of what my talk is about. And
well, the software that you use, like sounds like it operates the same way as something like AutoStacker in terms of doing the stacking, and then everything else being done in Photoshop, being cross-platform that a lot of people use, is perfect.
good. I hope that people feel that way.
Yeah, and Alan, you're right that the as far as the black and white goes, it's neat to see all the detail that you can get with the contrast there. But you know, the color images are really nice too. And one of the things I like about the way you colorized your images is, you know, they're not all the same. So you've got different color and different images. So it doesn't, you know, you're looking at the whole portfolio. It doesn't just look like the exact same sort of image over and over and over. I'm wondering, when you do you sort of pick the color? Is there anything about the particular image that leads you to a certain coloration, or is it just kind of what feels right for that particular image?
It's a lot of the latter. But I have to say, I not being that technical, I don't really have a processing regimen that can bring me to the same place 2 times in a row. So they're always slightly different. And when I exhibit the work, in that first show that I had, Fire and Ice, which was a joint project with a friend of mine who does highly magnified images of snowflakes, which was a wonderful show. We realized that the sun is about the size of your nail, held at arm's length, and a big snowflake is the same size. So there are these 2 things, you know, vastly different in size, but from our vantage point, they present to be the same size. But anyway, in that show, I put the images together as quartets. So a number of red-themed images were put together as a quartet. That's not, I don't know it's not a triptych. I don't know what a 4-sided 4-panel image is, but they're quartets, and they had a monochrome quartet and a yellow quartet. And it is a way to present them, and also to make them bigger, because I can't really print them much bigger than I do now, and keep the mystery of the detail. You
Sure.
lose the resolution.
What kind of printing do you use?
I have an Epson plotter, 24-inch plotter, which needs to be replaced. And I use heavyweight matte finished paper, which produces a beautiful kind of matte finish print. And then I put no glazing in front of it, so that you can really put your nose right up to it and explore the picture from very close, and not see the end of the resolution, which is why they're only 25 inches square.
Yeah, that
That's
sounds
right.
nice.
Your point gray is probably a 174, so you got a finite amount of pixels.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think it's 176, but I don't remember. It's
170.
It's an older camera at this point. You can now obviously get much bigger cameras and much faster cameras. It only captures 12 frames a second, so it's, you know, it's slow.
There's something to be said, though, for having those prints. We don't get to see so much now of the images that we see are just online on our computers. And of course, when you process an image, you have it looking the way you want it, then you have no idea what somebody's badly calibrated monitor might look like, or whatever it is. So it is nice to have those actual pieces of paper, which we don't see that much anymore. So
yeah. And you can get the work in front of people who don't hang out in astronomy channels and stuff, and they go to art museums or galleries or restaurants or other places, and they can take one home if they like, which is kind of fun.
True.
And I find the prints hide all that digital noise. Like, they always look like way better than they do on the screen.
Well, that's why you have to think seriously about how big you can make them. People are always asking, can I have a 60-inch square that I can put behind my sofa? But yeah, I guess if you don't get closer to it, then 20 feet, it'll look pretty good. But
And if you want to spend a couple $1,000 having it printed out.
yeah, it'd probably
Yeah.
be expensive to print.
But
it.
one of the problems we have with that is we make it ourselves, is we go ahead and print it big like that, but we inspect it up close. And when it's big, you're not supposed to be looking at it up close. You're supposed to be looking at it from the other side of the room. So
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of technology and craft in printmaking as well, and it's why I've sort of skimmed the surface of what I do. It's deeper than many people go, but I haven't all exhausted what my equipment can do. So there's usually more place to go, internally, and looking internally. There is that whole compulsion with getting new equipment, new cameras, new telescopes, new mounts, and I love going walking through Neath as much as the next guy, but I'm very slow to change them. I did buy one of these Strainwave mounts though, so that I can travel and have the benefit of go-to when I'm showing the night sky to my grandchildren at their school.
So which one did you get? Should I
I
ask?
got I bought a used Rainbow Astro mount from one of my my club friends who wanted to get the new E version of it, and it's fabulous. It's really a great.
Yeah, I have one in the basement. It's about like that big, and will hold 30 pounds nicely without counterweights. That's
They are remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be nice to put that in your case with your little stowaway, and you'll be good to go. So
When I
carry-on
was younger, I collected a bunch of Halliburton cases from the used photography stores that used to be all over, and I have a little tiny Halliburton case. It's like this big, but it's just the right size for that mount. It fits in, edge to edge. And it is an addition, but there was no other case, so no other mount that I could bring with me in a little case like that.
yeah, probably the tripod's a good bit bigger than the mount.
Well, I have a Gitzo heavy-duty Gitzo tripod, which collapses very small and is very stable. So it's definitely made a lot more room in my trunk for other people's hobbies when we go on vacation. I'm famous as a trunk hog.
I was gonna say, are there other people's hobbies?
Yeah, well, what else is there? I'm not
Yeah,
aware.
it's like
All right. Well, it looks like we did get all the questions. A number of
I think we did.
comments, people appreciating your presentation, and I certainly am among those. So this was fascinating, and I could look at your images of the sun all day long.
Yeah.
So they are really, really cool. So,
Thank
but
you.
we very much appreciate you coming on, Alan. This has been very nice. And with that, I think we'll be ready to sign off. So,
And Alan, you can stay with us after the program, after we stop, where
Sure, I'm happy to.
we can say things we can't say online.
All right. Good night,
All right.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.
See you next week.
See you next week.